Good evening, guys. Welcome to Weekend Warrior Podcast. And first of all, apologies. We haven't done a show last month. I've got a new job. My co-host, Groby, he's got some work obligations, so we are catching up. But tonight, I am also flying solo because my colleague is without internet. We thank the South African, deepest, darkest Africa for that. But tonight I've got I want to say famous, illustrious, well-respected guest that I'm very fortunate that he's coming on the show. David, you need to correct me if I've got your title wrong, because I'm flying by my seat of my pants. I don't understand all the US military terminology correct so perfectly. But you were the former commanding officer for the nuclear fast attack submarine, the USS Sante Fe. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, right on, 100%.
It was something that I was always very curious about, because here in South Africa, although we had some submarine action during the border war era between the 60s and the late 80s, but it's not something that takes huge. It's not very popular, not well known in South Africa. I think the South African Navy's got two submarines, so it's not really on the map in terms of that. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did it all start? Where do you come from? Where were you born? And how did you decide to end up at crushing depths, fighting Russians? I don't know. What do you guys do?
Yeah, right. So I was born in the hotbed of Berkeley, California. I was left-handed. I was this geeky, introverted kid. I was on the math team, chess club. I played soccer, but this was during the Cold War. So I grew up in the 70s. I went to high school in the 70s. And this was a big deal for me. And I decided to join the military to kind of do my part. But of course, it was kind of scary. But I was also a big reader. I was a big fan of reading history books. And I read about the submarines in World War II. I was like, oh, their job is to hide from people. So I was like, oh, that's what that's a natural place for an introvert to go. So I having no idea what it meant, I applied to the Naval Academy, and with this dream that I was going to go be a submarine commander. And the weird thing is, it worked out. I actually became a submarine commander.
I would assume, I mean, okay, it seems a bit ignorant, but a ship is a ship is a ship. A submarine is not a ship. So it would be something, if tell me if I'm wrong, that is extremely specialized, and you need to kind of go through the ropes here. You can't be on a surface ship and then all of a sudden take a leadership role, commanding officer type role on a submarine. It's something that you have to go through the ranks, because it's a very almost a niche in a military role.
Yeah, for the Navy, there are basically three main arms. One is the pilots and the aviation and all the people who support airplanes. Then there's surface ships, the traditional, what you think is traditionally the Navy, and then there's the submariners. Now, these are three separate tribes in the Navy, and we kind of have this. Well, we're better than you, and you're not as good as us sort of approach to the different tribes. But for me, submarines, you work with teams, and that was important for me. But the other thing was, in the Cold War, the submarines were the ones on the front line. You didn't see what they did, but what they were doing, they were the ones who were mixing it up with the Russian submarines. And the stuff that the submarine force was doing was just super, super cool. And we can't really talk about it, but it was just really on the front line. It was super cool. Like the aviators, like if we went to nuclear war, sure, they would go do something, but they really aren't doing a whole lot on a day-to-day basis. And the surface ships always had to be really careful. They did stuff and they showed presence, but you had to be a little bit careful about where you went and that kind of thing in a surface ship. But really, the submarines was the place to be. And we had about 3 or 4 heads of Navy in a row, and they were all submariners. The submariners ran the United States Navy during that time frame. And it was like, if you wanted to be where the action was, you went in a submarine.
I like the wording that you use, mixing it up with the Russians. That sounds very, very ominous and innocent at the same time. I mean, I just want to see if the book is here behind me. I mean, you can see here all the Tom Clancy's, the Hunt for the Red October and all of those. Oh, it's actually on my bedside table. But
Hunt for the Red October is a great book. And when it came out, I told my mom, I said, hey, I can't remember what year the book came out, but it came out, I think, in the 80s, right about the time I was on my first submarine. And when it came out, of course, my mom had no idea what I was doing. And so I just read this book. It'll tell you what it's all about.
But so you were in it pretty much. You were already active duty. If excuse the terminology, if I get that wrong, please don't be too harsh on me. But you were pretty much active duty at the height of the Cold War, correct?
Yeah, from the early 80s. As soon as I graduated from the Naval Academy, you go into a training pipeline, you go get assigned to your first submarine. So starting in the early 80s, I was on submarines, and the submarine I was first assigned to was stationed on the Atlantic. So we would go up in the Atlantic to places north of the UK and mix it up with the Russians.
But obviously my understanding is from watching movies and reading books, but surely there must have been 1 or 2, how shall we put this, sphincter closing moments where it's like, we're glad we came out of that one. Now I'm not sure what you're allowed to talk about.
Well, there are. I'll tell you one scary night. So we're way up north near the Arctic ice shelf, and the submarine I was on was designed to go under the ice and could actually surface through the ice. But anyway, of course, it's dark a lot of the time. We were up there in the wintertime, so it's dark like 20 hours kind of a thing. And I remember we were driving around, and I was the officer deck over the called the mid-watch. It's from midnight to 6 in the morning. It's a dismal time. And you're driving around, and you're hanging on the periscope because you always want to be, you're up. That's where you collect your information, is when you got the periscope up, see things. And as it started to get a little bit lighter, I started seeing these shapes in the water. And I was like, what are these shapes? And it's sort of like, is it a whole bunch of lifeboats? And anyway, it turned out that they were a bunch of patches of ice, like these big chunks. When I say big, I mean like hectare size or school bus size chunks of ice that had broken off from the ice sheet, and we sort of had ended up mixing it up, and all night long we were driving through these things. Fortunately, we didn't hit one, because if you hit one with the periscope, it can put you break the periscope, it's going to put your mission out of commission. And so that was a huge fright. All of a sudden we're dancing around with these icebergs. It wasn't what we were. We got lucky that we didn't hit one.
The one thing that I'm very curious about, I mean, at that time, and I would suppose probably not all that much different now. But if you're so deep and you are very far from home, and there's other countries that's also got subs and stuff in the water, and obviously that at some stage somebody's keeping an eye out for somebody else. But what would be, how shall I put this, almost the I don't want to say rules of engagement, because it doesn't necessarily mean you shoot at one another, but like if you're, for example, under the ice, I would assume, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, that you can't just press a button and you speak to somebody in the US that will tell you what to do. You're the commanding officer on the sub. He's the one that makes a decision now.
Yeah.
But how much autonomy is there in terms of, okay, we have a mission and we can do what we need to do to get the mission done? Or do you just respond to a threat from another sub? Or is, obviously I would also assume, evasion and just keeping quiet is also a pretty solid game plan. But what would typically have happened? I mean, if you would, here you're going under the ice, and sonar guy, heads of headphones on, he tells you, okay, well, we know there's something here. What would have been the typical response? Go look, see, or shut up and hope it goes away?
So we had two basic types of submarines. One submarine, we were like the fighters. Like we went and hunted the other submarines, and that's the kind of submarine I was on. And then we had our ballistic missile submarines, and those submarines hid in vast swaths of the ocean and had their missiles ready. But we were on I was on one of the fighting, like it was like a fighter kind of submarine. And our mission was to collect as much information about the bad guys as we could. So we had we would have these long lists of priorities of what was the most valuable to collect information, second, third, fourth, fifth, most valuable. So down at the bottom, you have things like the Russian auxiliaries, or what they sound like. And then maybe in the middle, what their destroyers sound like and how they operate. And up near the top, their submarines, and especially their ballistic missile submarines, would be a really good thing to learn about. So what you're doing all the time is you're saying, okay, well, we have the chance to get one of these high priority things, but it's like, we're not really sure we can actually get information on it, because we're not sure it's real, and we don't know how far away it is. Or we can have one of these lower priority things, which we are pretty sure we can get information on. So what you're doing is you're always balancing. Okay, do we want to go for the big thing and maybe come up with nothing, or go for the sure thing but give up the big thing? So it's and you have all these rules in place ahead of time. And you're right, you can't. There's no like internet. When you're deep, you get these very long, it takes a long time, 3-letter coded messages that you can get. And basically the codes are keep going. Oh, come up and talk to us. That's as much detail as they can give you in that, because a special code, if you get a certain sequence of letters, that means come up and talk to us. We need to talk to you. And then we would find a reason. But we would typically get a mission. Hey, here's a big chunk of ocean. Go find out everything you can about what the Russians are doing in this big chunk of ocean, and we'll see you in a month. And so like it's this happy hunting.
I'm not sure if I can ask this, but did you ever have a close encounter with another Russian sub, like in the books? Anything like that ever happened to you?
I can neither confirm nor deny that anything like that happened.
Duly noted. I've got a question here from one of our regular viewers, Mr. Shaul Botha, or I suppose if I Americanize it, Botha. What are some of the typical deployment periods for a submarine crew during the height of tensions with Russia?
So we would typically go out for 6 months. So we'd leave home port. Our home port was on the East Coast of the United States, and leave for 6 months. And then we would come back, and we would do one of those 6-month deployments every 2 years. And then when we were back, we would be doing local training and that kind of thing. And then we'd gear up for another one of these 6-month deployments. But when you leave, you may stop. So for example, we often stopped in the UK. There was a submarine base. The British base is Faslane, and the United States had a base nearby called at the Holy Lock. And so we would stop at Holy Lock on the way off, and you might stop in Norway or some other NATO country just to get some fresh lettuce. But that's the idea. It would be 6 months that you'd be away from home port. And that's pretty much the pattern that we still have. It's the 6 months on, and then when you're in home port in that intervening 18 months, you're at sea about half the time, and you're doing training and that kind of thing.
Talk to us a little bit about living conditions on a sub. I mean, I've read up a little bit. I know there's something called hot bunking where you share a bunk with some of your colleagues. But just give us a little bit of an idea. I mean, it's obviously different than on a normal ship, and it's cramped and dark and uncomfortable and whatnot. But just color it in for us a little bit.
Yeah, so it's like a normal ship, but it's more cramped and dark. It's like staying at a youth hostel with about 3 times as many people in the room as they put. But so yeah, you're right. So we go to sea with 140 people. We have 117 bunks on the submarine on Sante Fe, the submarine I was a captain of. So we do share bunks, but we make sure that the people on the bunks are on opposite watch teams. So one person's on standing watch or standing duty. One person can be in the bunk, and then they get up and they go and relieve the person on watch, and the person on watch then goes and gets in the bunk. And you're right, we call it hot racking because a rack is a slang term for a bunk. And when you get in the bunk, if the person just got out 10 minutes earlier, then it's still warm from their body heat. And so it's kind of a little bit of a weird thing to do. But we try not to share bunks at the same time because it's not really room for that. That would be weird. And we also segregate, obviously, the men from the women, so the women have their bunk rooms and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's very cramped. And so this COVID thing, for me, I'm like, yeah, what's the big deal? I'm just cramped. I mean, I have so much more square footage than I would have on a submarine. It's not bad. Plus, I get to see the daylight. So it's, but you learn to be tolerant. You bump into people, and they bump into you, and you can take offense, or you can just like whatever. The word we used was assume good intent. It's like, don't get upset. They didn't do it on purpose. And every once in a while, if we were doing some really intense stuff and the crew was staying up a lot, like we were only getting 3-4 hours of sleep 1-2 weeks in a row, then people start getting kind of cranky, especially me. I could just feel it. I would get kind of little things would irritate me, like there's no butter or something like that. And I would know once I started seeing, and I see people squabbling about these little things, I would know, oh, we're getting really tired. We need to back off and let everyone rest for 36 hours before we go back and get back into the intense operations. Because it is one of the things that really sort of irritates me is a lot of these movies show long periods of idle time for the sailors. And maybe it was like that long ago. It is not like that. There was always something that needs repairing. There's always more that you can learn. There's always more that you can study. You're getting qualified. You're helping other people. You're operating the submarine. You're planning. We are just going 20 hours a day. It's a very hard The impression you get if you went on a submarine is like, oh, there's just this thing is being run by a bunch of babies. The average age is something like 27 years old. The people range from age 20 to 40. The captain would be the oldest guy. I was 39 years old.
Obviously, I think like with most things, you get some guys that are just there, and they just set it out. But I would think that, especially in an environment like a submarine, when you apply, you would need a certain kind of personality and a way of it needs a special or specific kind of person to not only survive on a sub but flourish in that kind of difficult environment. Right in the very beginning of your career, then if you go through Naval Academy and you apply to go on the subs, was there any kind of psychiatric testing, or is it that there you go, you want to be on a sub, there you go, but or was there a process that guys have to go through?
Yeah, there's some psychiatric testing, but you know what these tests are like. Oh, like you have a night out. What would you rather do? Read a book, go to a dinner party with 8 people, or go to a rave with 1,000 of your closest friends? Like if you check that, you're probably not a submarine. You're probably not well cut out for a submariner. But we're really trying to weed out people. Like if you're quick to anger, it's not the place for you. I lovingly called my crew geeks with guns. When I was a captain, I would call my crew geeks with guns. One of the things you do that's fun, if you're going from one mission to another mission and you have maybe a day in between and the rules authorize it. So this was when I was operating in the Pacific. We could service the ship and we would do swim call. And we service the middle of the ocean. It's 4 miles deep or something. And you would put the guys, we could go swimming. And it's super fun. You only do it for like 15 or 20 minutes, but it's super fun. It's very nerve-wracking. Anyway, in the instructions for when you run swim call, because the Navy has a procedure for everything, including how to do swim call and flush the toilet, by the way, on a submarine. But when you do swim call, one of the things it says is you're supposed to put someone up in the sail with a rifle, and their job is to shoot the sharks that start coming at the crew. And I was like, okay, so basically submariners, like they're techies. Like they like to play with computers. They're introverts. They're never happier than when they got their headphones on, they're listening to something, or they're into some kind of a machine. And so now I'm going to take a guy like that. I'm going to put him up there with a rifle. Like the most likely is going to just shoot one of my own guys, one of the crew. So we put the guy up with a rifle, so we were complying with the instructions, but I wouldn't give him any bullets because I didn't want to shoot anybody. And then we had this convoluted process where if he saw a shark, of course we would bring everybody back to the boat, but we would get bullets up to him. But I kept the bullets with me because I didn't want anyone accidentally shooting one of our own guys. But that was kind of fun. We had a record where one of these 6-month things, we were doing a swim call. We got a swim call in every month. And the crew was very proud of that. We did some other stuff that was good for the country, but we did swim call for us.
I can't help but laugh. I'm just thinking, no, we need a guy with a gun to shoot just in case something tries to bite us. That's a very South African kind of thing to do.
Yeah.
Just in case a wild animal comes for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, once you're in the ocean, you've entered the food chain. And we saw some strange things. We were going through the Strait of Malacca, and there was this sort of, the water looked like it was boiling off in front of us, and we kind of were driving that way. And when we got closer, it turned out it's called a raft of snakes. And these are these sea snakes, and it was mating season, and there were just thousands and thousands. I mean, they must have covered acres of ocean, and there was just millions of these sea snakes, and they're all in this frenzied mating, and they're all, it was freaky. I've never seen anything like that.
You know, you remind me, a couple of months ago, we had on the show a lady called Jill Heinerth. She is the world's foremost expert on underwater cave exploration, and a fascinating conversation. And I said to her after a while that your day job consists out of every phobia that I can possibly think of. And now I think you're the same. You've got underwater, crushing depths, dark, things trying to eat you, explosions, fire. And now you, with the one exception, you now have other guys trying to kill you as well. That's
the bad guys are trying to kill you. Right. That's the least of your problem. Yeah, that sounds interesting. By the way, I love that movie, My Octopus Teacher. I think that's filmed in South Africa.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen this, but it's an amazing movie. Guy's diving, and he makes friends basically with this octopus. It's just for all you guys out there, it is an amazing movie. It's the one thing I've been recommending in 2020 to watch. My Octopus Teacher, amazing.
Look, we have, you know, especially I used to spearfish and I still paddle and do that kind of stuff. And we've got beautiful, you know, especially along the southern coast of South Africa where I live. I mean, I'm not at the most southern point, but I'm right at the south coast. The ocean is about 5 km from my house.
Nice.
And we're very fortunate here that all the rumors about South African, you know, nature and stuff, it's very much true. We're very, very fortunate in that sense. But one thing that I wanted to get you, just so I understand. So if let's say you have a mission or you are being attacked or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And you as a commander decide, okay, we need to either attack them or we are going to defend ourselves, and you tell you guys, all right, we're going to use torpedoes. I'm just curious about that. Do you get different kinds of torpedoes, or is it pretty much a one size fits all kind of weapon?
We have a very multi use weapon. So we don't for torpedoes, and there's like software updates to them, just like with your computer. You can have a 2019 Mac or a 2020 Mac, but it's basically a Mac. And so that's very helpful, because we don't have to say, oh, we're going to shoot a surface ship, so we're going to use one kind of torpedo, or we're going to shoot a submarine, we'll use a different kind of torpedo. We can use the same torpedo. You set it up a little bit different. There's different presets that you use for the torpedo. The torpedo runs out, and a lot of what you see in the movies is modestly accurate here. I mean, the torpedo runs out, it's pinging, and it's using sound to find the target. Now, if you're looking for a surface ship versus a submarine, the ping pattern obviously is going to be different. The other thing is these torpedoes have a wire which they pay out behind them and keeps them connected to the submarine. You can't transmit through the ocean, but you can transmit through the wire. And so this torpedo is telling us basically, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm seeing. I'm going into attack mode, that kind of stuff. And we can steer the torpedo.
That was my second question. So you guys can tell it where to go.
Yes. Yeah. So we can say, no, you've gone off course. You can imagine let's say you're looking for a submarine, but you're in an area where there's a bunch of reefs. And you can imagine that if I get some sound bouncing back off of a specific reef, just by bad luck, it might be that sound profile might have the same profile that a submarine, and the torpedo might say, oh, that looks pretty good, I'm going to go after that. And you can look at the chart and say, no, you're going after a reef. go back off to the right and look out in that area, that kind of thing. So it's a very sophisticated, multi-use and potent weapon. So basically we have those, and then we have missiles that we can shoot. They fly through the air long distances, 1,000 miles, and then we can fly them in a window. We can pick which window of the hotel to fly it into.
But they can be fired from underneath the surface, if I understand correctly. You don't need to surface to shoot.
Yeah, all this can happen with a submarine submerged. So it's, I mean, the missiles aren't such a big deal because they can fly 1,000 miles. So you can be out in the middle of the ocean and shoot those things. But the torpedoes, being able to shoot those things when you're underwater, I mean, it is hard to find a submarine when it's underwater. We often joke, we just show a picture of just ocean, no ships or anything, just a picture of the ocean, and say, hey, do you see the submarine? And then they're like, no. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. So there is no defense on a submarine. It's you only play offense. We're not defending ourselves. We defend ourselves by hiding and sinking you.
One thing that you see on the movies is what countermeasures, and you see like, and it spins and it makes bubbles. Is it real?
Yeah, we have stuff like that. But if you're launching countermeasures, you're already in a bad place, because that means you're being attacked, which means you were heard, which means you gave up stealth. I mean, so the way to live on a submarine is never be detected by sound or visual, but underwater is generally by sound. Never be detected. If you can't be detected, you can't get targeted. If you can't get targeted, you can't get shot. If you can't get killed. So you break the chain right at the beginning. Just never be detected. So you want to shoot the guy. You want to shoot him before they have any chance of even knowing that you're there. The first thing they know, the first time they realize that you're there, is when the torpedo is about to explode on them.
Do they explode on contact, or is it like some of those bombs where there's a space and it explodes a little bit further away from the target, or it makes a hit and then it goes off?
It's like that. On a surface ship, here's the way it works. On a surface ship, let's say my arm is the ship. You want to detonate it underneath the ship, but a little ways underneath. And what happens is you're blowing this, basically you're just making a big hole in the ocean. And then this ship falls into the hole and breaks in half. And so all you need, you're not in the game of, I'm trying to punch a bunch of holes. I'm not trying to punch a bunch of 10-foot holes in a ship. I'm going to shoot one torpedo and it's going to break your ship in half. And you're done. You remember the movie Titanic, where the Titanic's like rising up and then it breaks in half? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what it will look like. That's what your ship's going to look like after you get hit with it or a torpedo.
Okay, no, so I'm thinking about that scene in The Hunt for the Red October where he's closing the distance and the torpedo hits and no, it didn't have enough space to arm itself. So obviously it's bullshit.
Well, no, that I did talk about that. There are safety features which prevent the torpedo from turning on too close to you. But generally speaking, one of the things about movies is you have to make it visual for the viewer. Mm. In submarines, it's not a visual. Everything is in your head.
Yeah.
You don't see anything. You see blips on a computer screen. So it's all being processed in your head. And real submarine combat would probably not make a very good movie, because no one would sit there for 18 hours while you piece together little tiny snippets of information and doggedly pursued some bad guy. But that's what it takes.
If I'm thinking about some of the stuff, so if you've got, all right, you're doing your thing and you've mentioned quite a few times sound, and obviously from what you've mentioned earlier, you've got a team of guys, headphones on, and they are now listening. But sometimes what I've seen based on the movies and the books, all right, you're doing your thing and you're picking up, okay, there is another submarine or a surface ship or whatever the case may be. Is it really like, okay, everybody shut up, keep quiet, they can hear us? Or is there the insulation between yourself and the water? But I'm also thinking there's metal and that transfers sound and whatnot. Is it really so sensitive that everybody needs to shut up and keep quiet? Or if you pick up a problem, it's kind of business as usual, if I can use that wording?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's business as usual, but in terms of the sound, the people's voices is not the problem. That's not going to give you away. There's a sense if you make people quieter, they may be more attuned to the sounds that will give you away. But the sounds that will give you away, anything that's touching the actual hull of the submarine. So you can talk in the air. So it's got to get transferred from the air and then into the metal and then into the ocean. So in each of those transmission paths, you're going to lose a lot of the actual sound. And human voice is random frequencies. So what you're really worried about is like a propeller that goes. That is a man-made sound, and it's repeating, and you can that's a kind or a pump. Or when you're driving your car, you can hear humming and the tire vibration and the engine humming. Those are the sounds that you got to worry about, because those pieces of machinery are obviously mounted in the submarine, and we do stuff to make them incredibly well balanced, so they just hum, as opposed to 99% of all machinery that you've encountered on the world would not make it on a submarine, because it's just not built to the tolerances that you need. It has little manufacturing defects which cause it to go brrr, and when that's your air conditioner, like, okay, whatever, it's sitting outside, I don't really care, it's not going to get me killed. But on a submarine, that brrr, that's going to get you killed. So the stuff is machined incredibly well, and then we maintain it to a level that most machinery on land is not maintained to. So it keeps that it's very balanced, and because when things get off balance, then they start making them a little bit more. I'm pretty good with all these sound effects, huh?
It's not often our guests come with sound effects.
Yeah, I just. But some of the finally you can hear whales in the ocean and shrimp and dolphins and fish, and there's amazing stuff out there.
One thing that I remember from that thing for Business Insider that you did for them was you spoke quite a bit about misconceptions regarding the nuclear reactors on a submarine. So maybe just for our listeners, can you maybe just briefly explain how that actually propels a ship, and then what are like the misconceptions? Because I think one thing you said that it can't explode, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But maybe just give us a little bit of how does it actually work and whatnot.
So a submarine reactor, the way a submarine reactor propels the ship is the reactor is creating heat, and the heat boils water, and the steam is used to power steam turbines. So these are like big jet engines, but they use steam, not air. And these big turbines drive the ship and make electricity. Now there's some steps in between there, but that's basically how it works. The reactor is basically just a big heat source. We use it as a heat source. Now, naval nuclear reactors, like the kinds you use on aircraft carriers and submarines, are designed in a very specific way, which is as the temperature goes up, there's without touching any controls. One thing that's a misconception is we're sort of controlling the reactor by moving rods, and the reactor controls itself. They're so well designed, they control themselves. And as the temperature goes up, there's a feedback mechanism through the laws of physics. Doesn't require any human. Everyone on the submarine could be dead, which causes the power in the reactor to go down. So the difference between, say, Chernobyl and a naval nuclear reactor is naval nuclear reactor, if it started to heat up, the reactor would just naturally shut itself down. Chernobyl, it had the opposite. A Chernobyl reactor is designed so as the temperature goes up, reactor power goes up. And that you have to manually control the reactor by driving rods in. So that means if there's a problem with either humans aren't paying attention or the controls of the rods have a fault, now you're out of control because the reactor will go up, power goes up, temperature goes up, power goes up, boom. And it's just physically impossible. You can have, I'm not saying you can't have a problem. You could have problems. You could have impacts on the environment, that negative impacts on the environment. But compared to something like Chernobyl, it's impossible. And you're talking millions, 1/1,000,000th the magnitude on the environment, for example. It's the way the reactor is designed. It's a very costly design. It's a very sophisticated design, which is why Chernobyl wasn't designed that way. But it's a better design.
But if I understand correctly, and I, like I said, I'm a desk jockey in an internet company, but as I understand, it doesn't have any kind of external fuel source. The radiation, all that kind of, that's what powers this reactor. It doesn't. It can basically, for all intents and purposes, run. I don't want to say forever. I think they call it a half-life or something like that. If do I use the terminology correctly? It just so kind of powers itself.
So when we first started making reactors, we could run them for about a year or two, but we're now at the point where the reactor can run for the entire life of the submarine, which is 30 years or more. So, and it doesn't need to be refueled. And so what's happening is the reactor fuel, the way a reactor works is uses uranium, a certain isotope of uranium, which when you split it apart gives off a little bit of energy and some neutrons, and those neutrons bounce into more uranium. And it's when these neutrons are hitting these uranium atoms that it activates this there's a probability of the thing splitting. So when you have a reactor running at constant power, the number of neutrons that are being emitted and then being absorbed by the other uranium atoms splitting is at a constant. Some of the neutrons are being absorbed, some of them are escaping out into the world, but some of them are continuing to make these fissions of these uranium atoms. And so that's how it works. And again, the way the fuel is made in a reactor is it's not solid uranium. So the uranium is spaced out in a way, the uranium atoms are spaced out in a way in the fuel that you couldn't get a bomb-like effect. In order to get a bomb, you need the fission to go from 1 to 10 to 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000 to 100 trillion in a nanosecond, but that requires the uranium atoms to be so close together. It's basically, and so that's why I say it can't explode like a bomb. There's no way it can explode like a bomb. It's just physically impossible.
It's fascinating. I'm just trying to think that somewhere some guy back in the day decided, you know what, this seems like a fantastic way to power a ship or a boat or a submarine. I mean, it's a little mind-boggling for me that guys actually thought about this is the way to do it from the era of diesel engines.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I would also assume then that because the sub is very self-sustaining, that the guys on the sub that actually look after the reactor, that super highly trained, highly educated, not your average sailor, correct?
Yeah, and I'll just wrap it up with this. And this is one of the things that just irked me. I mean, there's a lot that's amazing about how it works, and it really is amazing when you see the way the reactors work. I mean, amazing is not too strong of a word, but we would take. So in the submarine force, we had the opportunity. We would take the cream of the crop of all the sailors. Like if you had this score, you could go in a surface ship, and you this kind of a score to go in. So we'd take all these smart people, and we send them to all this amazing schooling, and we'd sit them down, and we'd tell them exactly what to do. And to me, it frustrated me and would blow my mind. And there's a great quote from Steve Jobs, which is like, we don't hire smart people so we can tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And so this idea that, well, yeah, you can't make unbounded decisions because the laws of physics will prevail. But we applied this rigidity of structure to everything, including things like how we were who was going to drive the ship into port, and all kinds of things where we didn't need to be so rigid. We could be much more experimental, much more creative. And there's a huge amount of creative space that wraps around all these rigid processes that we have. But because the whole organization was tuned to adhere to process, we'd apply that mentality to things which really weren't suited to adhering to a process, like engaging in combat. I'd get young officers, and we had lots of books about how to engage in combat, but they're very deliberately called like guidance and policy, versus the reactor manuals are all procedures that you follow. It says do this, then this, then this, and this in that order, and that's what you do. You do it exactly like, and you check everything off when you go. And then the guys would come to the front end of the ship where we were fighting the ship, and they would say, well, where's the procedure for this torpedo? Like, there's no procedure. Use everything you know. We're going to find the guy. We got to figure out what his operating pattern is, and we're going to sink him. There's no prescription for that kind of thing. And I see that in business, where people like to fall back on, well, tell me what to do, or what does the book say here? And it's like, no, we got to figure this out. It's too complicated. And by the way, in 6 months, everything's going to change too. So yeah, for me, it was a magic time. I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore, because
I wanted to ask you if you miss it. That was one of my next questions.
No, I mean, I'm more, I don't know if I'm more fortunate or not, but I end up, like, the story is core to our leadership approach that we work with companies around the world. So I end up telling the story over and over again. And so I get to relive it, and it's really fun for me. And when you're on one of these teams where people are just, everything is just coordinated. I say you want to be coordinated, not controlled. So, and you see this sometimes in a paramedic team, where they'll show up on site, and there'll be 3 or 4 people, and they'll just, one person will say, they'll just say what they're doing. Elevating the patient, taking blood pressure, injecting adrenaline, putting a brace on the back, and they're saying these things as they're doing them, or maybe moments before they're doing them, and everyone's just And it just seems like there's this magic choreography. Well, like, who's in charge? Well, we all are. We're self-coordinating. And someone will say, putting a splint on the leg, and then someone else will say, "Oh, I need to do this first." Hold or something, and there's just like this magical dance, and that's kind of how, when it's going right, that's kind of how it feels, and it's cool. Everyone wants to be on a winning team, so I get to relive that magical feeling, and I think any organization could be that way. But not if they're stuck in industrial age leadership where they're trying to control the people.
Almost kind of institutional inbreeding, where we did it the same way, for the past 40 years, and we're going to keep doing it. And guys in corner offices make decisions, but they're never out in the field. And it's interesting to me that guys still, it's like sometimes where I'm very fortunate that I work in a company that's extremely agile, and I'm very fortunate that we are not like that. But I did work for one or two companies that was like, and I just sometimes shoot my head where senior managers would insist on something in a certain way. I'm like, please get out of your office, get a jean and some boots on, and then I'll go and show you why what you're saying isn't right. But still sometimes guys get completely stuck on it. But before we get to that, I've got one or two questions that came in.
We got to wrap this up, Ron.
Yeah, I want to know.
The only thing about that is we call that the traditional approach is in a hierarchy, we push information to the people with authority, and then the decisions come back down. And this is the old way of doing business. If you're still doing that, you're going to go out of business. What the best organizations do now is they take the authority for making decisions and they distribute it to the people who natively have the information.
The one question that I do have for you, and I've seen it in the movies, and what does it mean when they say you're so many degrees up or down bubble?
Yeah. I'll take my submarine model right here. So it's just like on an airplane. You want to know, am I tipping up or am I tipping down? What's the attitude? And you can, because you're not really ever going as fast as you are on an airplane. You basically can feel it, but you can get disoriented. So we have an actual bubble. It's an inclinometer. So it's a curved shaped tube with a bubble in it. And when the submarine goes like this, then the bubble moves a little bit one way, and you can say, oh, we're at 10 degrees up, 20 degrees up, 40 degrees up, 50 degrees up. When your submarine goes like this, the bubble moves back in the other direction. You can say we're 10 down, 15 down. Now, because this tube is it's not a full circle. At the end, there's this little place where the bubble can get captured. So if you go too far up or too far down, the bubble actually goes out of the main part of the tube, and that's when we say you lost the bubble. So I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase in business, we lost the bubble. It comes from submarining, saying things got so crazy, the bubble actually went out of the actual. It's like a level. It's the same thing in principle in the level that you have with the bubble. It's just that it's a much bigger instrument with a much more curve to it. But the phrase "we lost the bubble" it comes from submarines.
Last question before we wrap up. What are you doing now? You mentioned it very briefly earlier on. What do you do now, and what is next for David Marquet?
So I'm a business author and run a consulting company. We help clients around the world. My next project is a book, and I'm partnering with someone who actually knows something about psychology, Mike Gillespie, who's an IO PhD in IO Psych. And the book is about how ego defense derails our decision-making calculations. And by ego defense, I mean that feeling that, oh, I need to somehow prove that I'm smart, good, worthy, whatever it is, and how that gets in the way of a number of things, from whether it's learning, graciously accepting feedback, playing second fiddle to somebody else when it's appropriate, letting the team take the limelight, sticking with a decision that you made because you were the one that made the decision, therefore it must be right, and all these. There's a whole host of ways in which our egos derail our lives. And why is that? I must have been something adaptive about it, because we wouldn't still be here as a species if it were so bad. But maybe the situation's changed. So that's the project I'm working on. So if you have a story about where you feel, this is for all the listeners out there, you have a story for where you feel like, hey, maybe my ego got in the way of what I really wanted to do, I'm interested in hearing those. And send me an email at david@turntheshiparound.com, or just connect with me on LinkedIn, David Marquet, and let me know, and we'll see. Your story may end up in the next book.
David, from my side, thank you very much. I know it's always a hit and a miss if we get hold of guests, and we're very fortunate if they come onto the show, because we, from a small South African podcast, we don't really have all that much to offer except an attempt at conversation. And thank you very much from our side. It was a big pleasure for me, and best of luck in all your future endeavors. And I actually tried to, I'm a bit old school. I like hard copies of books, as you can see behind me. I've been unable to find one of yours here in South Africa yet, but I've managed to find some ebooks. But I like the feel of the paper. But yeah, thank you very, very much from our side. And that's it. For any final thoughts from your side?
No, I'm good. I hope everyone has a great rest of the year. If you're watching this live, happy holidays, happy New Year.
David, I'm going to ask you just to stay on while I sign off and do the thank yous, and I'll talk to you offline quickly. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. As always, nice to see some of the regular names always comes up. I know I've been neglecting you guys for a little bit this past month. We've got some exciting guests lined up for a new year. I've been giving it a little bit more than attention. As usual, our partners, Renegade Media, Roman Kabanak and his crew, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity for the show. Paratus.info, Gideon Hubert, please support his campaign for firearms relicensing in South Africa in partnership with Dear SA. Everyday Carry South Africa for always allowing us to share on their platforms. Mornay, Gareth and you guys. Combative Concepts, thank you very much for always sharing and looking after our training needs. Guys, please share and like and give some attention to our local supporters. Guys, as usual, thank you from my side. I will see you guys again in the new year. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Cheers. Bye.